Werner, it would be great to share your perspective as a pioneer.
I think if you ask me what has surprised me, or if we see really cloud as only the next step in sort of a technology evolution, whether it's from mainframe to client server, as you said, web, and then cloud is sort of the next step, I don't think it would be that big. I think what we've seen is that the economic models that we set against it, be able to acquire resources on demand, release them, maybe you no longer need them, only pay for what you've used, use all the core competencies. Those are actually key economic methods that are very useful in times of uncertainty. We actually do this in every other piece of our company, of our companies. We hire people when we need them, we release them when we no longer need them, we hire core competencies. It's actually a model that we use everywhere in our organizations, except in IT. In IT, we were sort of held hostage by having to drive costs down. You had to make very long contracts with single providers. And as such, the providers were in charge, not the buyers of the technology. And I think what we've done with cloud is break through that and make sure that the provider needs to be on his toes every day, delivering the absolute best service. Otherwise, the customer can walk away. And so we've really tilted. If there's something that I see, it's much more about transforming businesses than it is about transforming IT. And we see so incredible stuff being done. If there are no gatekeepers on this platform, if you can get unlimited amount of resources, whether it's in life sciences, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's rovers running around on Mars, all this stuff is powered by cloud. And in the enterprise, it is obvious that they can move much faster now than that they could before, and I think that's more important for them.
So talking about the enterprise, you can't talk about, well, first of all, it's clear to establish that the public cloud is really the winner today, whether you talk about Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or any other Rackspace branded cloud. So public cloud is winning. But how does that work with the fact that if you ask enterprises, you talked about how it's so obvious, their biggest issue is security. There have been some very well-documented breaches that we've all read about, or privacy. You can't sit at the stage and not talk about the NSA surveillance scandal and the angst that's been created around where your data resides. How do you really think about where things are going to go, given the contradictions between how big the cloud is and how bigger it's becoming, and some of these very real concerns at the enterprise level?
Well, actually, I think many of our customers, many of our enterprise customers, if you talk to them, they'll tell you that their security posture has actually improved after they moved to the cloud. The kind of very fine-grained tools that we can give them to protect themselves and make it explicit to them are things that they were never able to do internally. And so what we've seen is that going from relying on a sort of a firewall around all your systems, you go to a very fine-grained per application security model. And as you can imagine, security for us is our first and foremost concern. We will move resources from feature development into security. The operational side of it, you can imagine that the amount of energy and the amount of expertise that we put in security, you cannot get anywhere else. And so the cloud will become the place where if you want to compute securely and protect the privacy of your customers, that will be the place where you will do it, not on-premise.
Okay, I'm going to find somebody who disagrees with you at some point.
We
have too many believers of the cloud here on this panel, so I'm going to have to stir it up.
I would love to talk about the surprise part.
Yeah,
and because
please do.
Perspective is that in the scope of 3 to 5 years, what has changed is two basic things. Is before we used to think, I need the infrastructure, then I put my stuff on it. So you had a planning phase, and then you would put your stuff on it, and you better not make a mistake. This has been totally changed. And hardware has become software. So from the perspective of application developer or engineer is that you just have a function that you call that says create computer, and he takes care of it. And that allows you to make enormous mistakes. It allows you to fail in different ways, to start again, to do 15 different versions at virtually no cost. And does this happen in the scope of 3 to 5 years? It's just simply incredible. And in terms of security, we should first of all make a difference between security and privacy, because sometimes people tend to confuse the two. And
well, let's talk about privacy.
Okay. Well, privacy is an interesting issue, because first it has to do a little bit with security, in the sense, is your server available, right? Is it? And there they do wonderful things that if you wanted to, for example, install this multi-step authentication where you have your cell phone and your password, a typical enterprise will take like 6 months to roll something out like this, but you can do it with a mouse click on this platform, right? So that's easier. On the privacy stuff is a bit trickier, because privacy, I think it's very easy for me to trust Dropbox today. It's very easy for me to trust Google today, because they have no interest in sharing my data. I mean, today it's fine. The problem is what happened in 15 years. What if Google goes rogue? You know, there have been 2 apps from Android removed by Google this week from the App Store because these apps were really nice and people used them, but then some other guy bought the apps and turned them into a distributor of malware. But the data is there yet, right? So it's very difficult to get this sense of time in the privacy debate.
And Aditya, where did you end up with that?
Can I ask the audience a question?
Yeah, of course.
Is this on? How many of you have ever been to a data center or racked a server? Okay, that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
How many of you have had to essentially install fans in a data center when your data center is like actually heating up, and you basically have to go buy fans to actually cool everything down? I mean, these are things that I've had to do. I mean, I was at Facebook for a long time, and when Facebook was blowing up, we're like, oh, we need to go buy another 100 machines, and then we would go rack those machines. And then when the cooling in the data center wouldn't work, we would go buy fans, and we would actually go install them, right? It sucks. It really sucks to have to do that.
But sometimes you can just open a window.
Unless you're like deep in, there are no windows in most data centers, unfortunately. So I mean, contrasting that to basically when after I left Facebook, I started my own company, and I just decided one day I'm going to start writing code today. And it was the best experience. I basically fired up the AWS Management Console, spun up 3 machines, had to pay like $10 to get started, and I was just writing code. And just the process of having to do that when you can't have that service would have taken 4 weeks. I'm like, do I have to go to buy hardware? Then I have to go to find like essentially some place to go rent this out. And the world is just so much further today. And for every example of like, for instance, that I was basically starting a company, there are probably 10 other entrepreneurs who are doing the same. And really, it's the unleashing of that creativity that I think is really, really powerful.
But at some cost, right? It's not free.
It is way freer to actually pay $10 than to actually go pay $10,000 to buy 3 machines. I think I do think it's free.
So for startups, this makes ultimate sense. I mean, that's how you started. If you're focusing on building a minimum viable product, you're not worrying about all the fans and not the conventional sort. You're not worrying about hardware and software licenses and all of that stuff. But at some point, does that equation shift? I mean, clearly Dropbox has stayed for a long time. Well, you've stayed forever on AWS. But Twitter built their own, Zynga moved off, or is in some sort of a hybrid. Werner, are you going to disagree with everything I ask?
Well, I think that the answer there really is like how much of the margin AWS wants to keep. There is some margin. They don't tell us what it is, but there is some margin there, right? And at some point, if it makes economic sense for a company to want to recover that margin at considerable cost of having to build out their own deployments, then maybe somebody should do it. I don't know if I want to be in that game. Yeah.
Remember, we lowered our pricing 39 times since we launched without any competitive pressure. Yeah, the goal is for us, if our customers help us create additional economies of scale, and of course we do a lot of innovation and efficiencies and things like that as well. So those 2 things combined, instead of pocketing that money, we've made the decision that then we would lower our pricing for our customers. The goal is...
Because you're not pocketing any money, right? I just want to make sure I heard what you said.
No. What I'm saying is that, this for us, this is a high-volume, low-margin business. Yeah, and we're happy with these low margins. We know very well how to execute at that. And if these margins would grow, then we just shrink them again by giving money back to our customers. Wouldn't be the first time if a salesperson would call any of our customers and actually go, we think we can save you some more by doing this or that, and where we actively help drive the bill down with our customers. We even give them tools, Trusted Advisor, that allows them to inspect their environment and then give them advice about if you do these 10 things, then you can cut your bill in half. For us, if we can get the pricing of the cloud to a point where it's like light. When you woke up this morning and you switched on the light in your room, you didn't think about how much that was going to cost you. Yeah, it's in a noise. If we can get these basic compute units at that level, the amount of innovation that's going to happen on top of it will be incredible. These guys have built an amazing product, and we'll see many more of these amazing products happening if we can just make sure that all of this stuff becomes in a noise.
So the whole world is going to go to the public cloud. And of course, you guys will win, but others will win, and you talk about that.
Well, you know, it's not like that there will be no data centers left. I think there will be a lot less data centers. And it's not like there will be less hardware sold. There will be the ones buying the hardware, or you know, many of the other places. This is not a winner-take-all market either.
So, okay, so it's not a winner-takes-all market, and yet today you have 5 times more compute capacity in use than the next 14 cloud companies combined.
Apparently we're doing something well where our customers are rewarding us for it.
So, but explain that. So, you know, how is this going to trend out? Sorry, Aditya.
I mean, the way, I think you mentioned this earlier, compute is a utility, right? Like utility like electricity, like water. And basically, over time, you've kind of had like people. I mean, that's exactly what Bezos says, right? He basically compares like what the stuff AWS is doing to electricity. And over time, there could be one big provider, there could be like 5 big providers, but the interfaces that they're providing will likely probably normalize to be the same thing. It'll be probably like just have a standard set of like computing concepts, whether that be for EC2 or S3, but like the APIs will likely look very similar.
So Florian, I want to get you in here because you're a big open source believer, and there are movements like OpenStack that are actually gaining momentum, and also you've seen different environments where it's not all about the public cloud. Share some perspective of something that's different from what we heard about where the movement is going.
Sure. So I think a lot of things are obviously moving to the public cloud, but I think if you're in high-frequency finance, for example, right, you're usually relying on very specialized hardware. In fact, there's the story about this fiber line that was put in place between New York and Chicago just to shave a couple of milliseconds off your transaction processing. And these sort of applications I don't see moving in the cloud anytime soon. That being said, I think we probably would agree that a lot of the models that are built in order to drive those decisions are being processed in the cloud using Hadoop and frameworks like that. But I think there's certainly space or room for a lot more private data centers.
But of course, it's not the case where just everybody's just lifting and shifting all the stuff they had in their own data center and move it over and dump it in the cloud. There must be a reason why you do it. There must be a return on investment, because it's often not free to move these kind of things. And things that weren't built to be reliable and weren't built to be elastic are not suddenly going to become elastic because you drop it into a cloud. So so there will be a very long period, I think, definitely where you have established enterprises with large IT shops that will have a hybrid model. You know, they'll move more and more things over into the cloud when hardware goes off lease, or when you know, the license for a particular piece of software runs out. Sort of these IT live events that will slowly move over. There'll be lots of new stuff being developed by organizations that that are first being developed for the cloud only. And so we see a whole range of these kind of patterns. There's some organizations that do move all. So Kempinski, for example, high-end hotel chain in Austria and in Germany and around the world, are moving all of their IT over because they want all of their people to focus on building new stuff, on building new things for their customers, instead of doing the things that don't matter.
I think that, you know, one thing people seem to forget, you know, I accept this idea in theory and in theory alone that you're going to have a deep hybrid, but in practice, right? Just 2 data points. One, if we all accept and understand that the data centers, the corporate data centers of old, had to be grossly over capacity because we didn't have fungibility. So you had to build them out for peak rather than for average. And then we paid licenses because the old software model was not based on per user, that was based on per processor. So there is a whole industry of licenses out there that are effectively sucking blood out of a system because they have built their business model on that overcapacity. And the overcapacity is 8 or 9 times what you need, not 8 or 9%. So if you're prepared to pay that price, it's one thing. But what I always ask, when I was CIO at Dresdner, okay, I built standardized environments, I virtualized everything. I had what I would call a private cloud before the term existed. Then 2001 happened, and my instructions were to shut down a great deal of my shared environment in terms of businesses. But my cost didn't change. And the question I always ask people is, don't get confused by public cloud, private cloud terms. If you want to scale up, who pays? If you want to scale down, who pays? If you take the capacity risk both times, then you're not using an infrastructure provider. If you want to really test what you're doing, try this. Ask your own IT department how long it will take to spin up a server and compare that to what a startup in your industry can do on the same question. The answer will usually be 100-fold difference. If you can afford that, then you have a regulated monopoly. Because I can't understand how you're going to make money with that difference otherwise.
It's actually really interesting because the same kind of thought
process... By the way, use the term monopoly.
I think the same actually kind of question applies to security. So if you wanted to make something really secure, the team that you need to build of essentially people who are constantly internally trying to hack your systems so that you know that before somebody actually else does, or you're basically deploying all of the latest kernel patches, you're basically deploying all of the latest security. It's really difficult to build a world-class team to do that. And the question I ask is do you really want to go and hire first find these people and then hire them? And can you even do that versus the ability of, say, somebody like Amazon or even us to kind of hire those people and be world-class along that dimension? So I think that just because it's just easier for the centralized providers to build up that kind of expertise than it is for everybody out there to kind of go and do it themselves.
That's an age-old argument.
Well, I think the other thing is that what most, young businesses as well as enterprises enjoy is that, do you want to launch in Tokyo tomorrow? Do you want to go or get off the ground in Sydney? It's the same button that you click to launch your applications there than anywhere else. For example, I think many startups are not targeting the local market anymore. They immediately start global market. If you look, for example, at possibly every Israeli startup I know, they're all targeting the global market. Nobody targets Israel. So for them, it's important to be able to sit behind their console, not have to do data center negotiations in Japan or in Singapore and get lawyers involved and all the other stuff you have to do before you can get your business off the ground somewhere. It's just a push of a button. And so going global is just instant.
So what's going to happen to the entire hardware, the legacy traditional vendors, the HPs, the IBMs, the CAs, the service integrators, the guys who've built billions of dollars in revenues servicing exactly that? And worse still, the people who are building data centers are doing it by engineering completely commodity hardware from everything from network to storage. So we're talking about an industry of tens of billions and a lot of companies. Look forward for me for a while and think about the revolution from a kind of corporate perspective. I know you're not allowed to speculate, but just humor me for a bit. What are we going to see there? Is it just bloodbath?
I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for them, of course. I think given the margins that some of these companies have been enjoying for a very long time, I think that's the reason why it took them so long to catch on to this. They're, making a lot of money covers up a lot of sins. And so what happens then is that, to be able to actually get into a mode where you can operate at a relatively much lower margin than that they were used to, it makes it a struggle for them. And so I don't know whether they're able to actually fall into that.
If I can just add to that, I mean, my entry to the industry was 35 years ago in Burroughs and then in Data General. The industry I entered, we thought we would make money on hardware and we could get software and services for free because the abundance and the scarcities of those days were like that. Right? Today, someone like IBM makes money because of Linux rather than with Linux.
Sure.
Okay? So the huge change in saying it's not the hardware you make the money anymore on, it's not even the software you make the money on. Many of the services have actually been automated. This is part of the friction and the latency that people like, pretty much everyone on this panel are seeking to take out of human process. What's left is the value of human relationships. That's not going to change. So if you imagine somebody like IBM reinventing themselves 20-odd years ago, and it's a long process of reinvention, if you become more customer-centric, and the hardware is nothing more than a commodity, and you don't have to sell it. The idea of a hardware manufacturer saying, any hardware you like, we'll still work with you. A telco saying, any network you like, we'll work with you. That the competence is about how you engage with your customer and make it easy and convenient for them, then you have the chance. If you actually think you're in the business of shifting tin and raising that flag and saying, I can retain those margins, the only way you can get away with that is regulatory capture, right? Otherwise, you're going to die.
But also from the engineering level, 10 years ago, we still had preferences. So engineers would say, I'd rather run on Sun versus HP. I mean, it's like having a car, like you prefer BMW to Audi. I haven't heard this in 5 years. Like, I don't know if is this car spinning at 7,200 or more. I don't care.
So but where does that commoditization end, right? We've talked about you being like electricity. So we talked about where you enter the point in the stack and everything below that is commodity. What does that mean for where AWS is going to go? What does that mean for Salesforce? I'd be interested in this commoditization argument. How far can you take that?
I think that as long as customers have freedom of choice, they find things to do and ways of doing things that nobody else has thought of. We currently have an environment where the cost of experimentation, the learning from failure, is the lowest it's been in my life. That means that we're already on the back foot, okay? We are not able to evolve the industry as fast as the customer. As long as that is the case, we have a lot of work to do, because the customer will seek to find what they would like standardized and taken out of the way. And if we don't make it simple and convenient, they just won't use it, okay? Almost everything that we see as the poster children of industry today, they were previous examples that didn't work, okay? Whether you look at music devices, whether you look at search, whether you look at RSS feeds or whatever else, we've seen that people have come out with the idea and the idea hasn't necessarily won. It's how simple and convenient you make it. So today, I don't even want to predict where customers will take it, but when we were speaking earlier about the Hoover Dam and cement or the Large Hadron Collider, it's clear to us that we have data sets that we have not yet been able to use to place computation on because they're still too large. There is work to be done at an early enough stage. We have data that has been digitized that we haven't had time to look at because it's like almost in the pipeline, like, say, geographic images at high sort of resolution of the whole world and trying to look through it. And we don't even know what else people are going to look for when they get the chance. So there is enough room for innovation. Yes, commoditization will drive us up the stack. But I think what we should be looking for is, I'd rather say it's more a Polanyi unknown than a Rumsfeld unknown.
Okay, how many people actually understood that differentiation?
I mean, I would also argue that this has been playing out over the last 5 years, because you're really asking is at which point in the abstraction stack are we going to standardize? And it has been playing out. And I think that arguably AWS has actually been the market leader here because they picked the right point, which was essentially virtualize like services and hardware.
Sure.
And with Google's recent basically switch away from focusing, as far as I can tell, on App Engine to being Cloud Engine.
Cloud Engine, yeah.
Which is essentially the same like abstraction level, which is we'll provide you virtualized like CPU and virtualized disks with like network interfaces. And that's actually been playing out, right? So I think to some degree that seems like the right part in the abstraction stack.
But you're making it sound all like a commodity. You know what? It's just to take it as a given. Why are people like Google, who have very big margins in other parts of their business, going towards this? Why is Cloud Engine so important to them? This is strategic, right? They want their application developer to be in their ecosystem. So it's not just beyond this is a utility and it's a volume game. There has to be a reason why Microsoft and Google are going so deeply trying to win market share, and they're very behind because they dropped the ball.
Is there a question?
I mean,
yeah, no, the question is, if it's just a commodity, why are you seeing so many players?
The hardware is a commodity.
First of all, I still think that there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, if you look at every one of our customers, whether it's, let's say, young businesses or whether it's enterprises, there's still so many pain points in IT in the organization that we can still take away. And you may call it going up the stack, but if we build products like, for example, the data warehouse, Redshift, or Glacier, the archiving service, these are hugely successful building blocks for many organizations. Suddenly you have a data warehouse where you can have a data warehouse on a Friday afternoon. Before that you need to make massive investments. And the explosion of digital information in the organization means that these data warehouses are growing to a point that they become extremely expensive. And suddenly we've turned that into much more of a commodity. And so it becomes available for everybody to use. Not only those who have deep pockets and can afford themselves to spend millions of dollars on a data warehouse database.
But to answer your question is, if you have a commodity, to be the first non-commoditized layer of a commodity is usually the best place to be. I mean, so they want to be the operating system of the commodity that used to be PC, and now it's a bigger infrastructure.
Absolutely. Also, like, if you could own the world, like, if you were the world's single largest or maybe sole electricity provider, that'd be pretty sweet, right? Like, that would be a pretty good position to be in.
No, I think there's one other thing about commodity we have to understand, right? When we had analog commodities and they standardized, they stayed standardized. Yeah? In the digital world, what is commoditizing continues to change even though it is commoditized. Commoditization could be seen to be a level of principles in standardization that's taken high margin out of it, so it becomes a utility style business. But it still changes. So you have to, the commodity of yesterday, I mean, if you take a look at something like Linux, and you look at the code base today compared to the code base that began, what is continuing in use, right? The decay rate, the stuff that is no longer relevant, is high. And so the pace of change becomes part of it. If I build something that is fossilized, right? And the old days, we used to say, reduce unit costs, go for deep vertical integration. And that model, which implied a commoditization, did commoditization through tariff. Because you could, like private equity or outsourcing, you could force a high cost of change. The market today cannot accept a high cost of change, in which case, if you build a monolithic system, soon you're going to find that the cost of change exceeds the value of change. Ecosystems, by definition, are open because you are creating a leverage in the cost of change to saying it's going to be lower than the value it creates. But you can't do it by building walls around the system. So I don't care who's trying to play in my ecosystem game. Yeah. I don't think that game is there to be played, because what we're calling commodity is still in some ways organic and active.
Thank goodness, otherwise venture capitalists wouldn't have a business. I want to talk to you a little bit about data. You started talking about the value of data and how much is there. I think people know the stats. 90% of the data was created in the last 2 years. 80% of it is unstructured. Just talk a little bit about what does it mean to have cloud-enabled big data. Is the data really all in the cloud? A lot of it is on-premise. How do the two really intersect at a practical level?
Well, I think, first and foremost, I think we've been building lots of tools in the past 3-4 years to make this hybrid model work. Yeah, where some computation can run on-premise, some runs in the cloud, you can move your data back and forth. We've tried to make these things much more easier, much more controlled, make sure that, for example, the security systems can be federated over both on-premise as well as in the cloud. So many of these things we've done. I still see a very close relationship between, let's say, sort of the big data processing and cloud itself. Okay. Because you need sort of, it's a very different approach, I think, in big data from what traditional data analytics was. In the old world, with business intelligence, you knew on forehand what kind of questions you wanted to ask. That drove the data model that you used, and that drove the data that you collected. Now it's sort of the inverse of that. You collect as much data as you want to. You don't have an idea about what the data model is going to be, or you're going to try different ones on top of that. And then iteratively, you use computational power to go look for the pot of gold that's supposed to be in there. And so that's a very different approach. And as such, cloud and sort of big data processing are quite closely aligned, because, you want to get just your computational power on demand whenever you need it, whether you want 5,000 nodes or 10,000 nodes, or something that you can do at any time.
So maybe it's the killer app. Big data is the killer app.
And revisit it over and over again, because I think that's one of the things that happens as well.
I mean, it may sound contrarian. I'm not sure I want to be. I like and respect Werner, but I think there is a different trend on this. The amount of, when we used to take decisions in the past, all the information we wanted was actually inside our firewall before we had firewalls. Over time, what is happening is the percentage of information that we need to make decisions on, that's outside us rather than inside us, is increasing. So we have no choice but to say, what's the most efficient way of merging heterogeneous data sets that are incomplete, messy, unstructured, only some of which is held inside the firewall. And I don't know whether there is a better answer than the cloud when a lot of that data is actually resident there, okay? People used to say, code can be moved faster than data, okay? if we think that the world we live in, data is going to grow exponentially, and code is not going to grow at that pace, it is better to be able to drive the code to where the data is. And as more and more people, things, even concepts get connected, let's go to that critical mass of data, because the bulk of the data we deal with, the social networks, where they're signaling, the devices and where they're throwing off data, even my cats currently are generating data, but at least at my choice, if not theirs.
But I think what we see is that there's many other services in the cloud that are combined with the data processing. I mean, Dropbox now has their APIs. The Nasdaq has stored historical market data in S3 for many, many years. They've now put an API on it so that you can have access to it. There's lots of public data sets, and there's many data being shared between partners and organizations as well. And as such, that's an ideal place for collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of data still. I mean, let's just do the math, right? I mean, we have 1.3 billion people with laptops. Dropbox only has 200 million users, so we have 1.1 billion users left to get at that point. And I know that all of their hard drives are not on Dropbox yet. So like almost by definition, most data is on-prem. Or build and believe, yeah. But like, or take the other one, right? They're like maybe 2 billion cell phones. Yep. And I know that everybody is maybe taking on average of like 20 photos a month. Not all of them are on Dropbox yet. So I would say that there's a lot of data still that is still on devices, like and for all of us, that we just haven't yet moved to the cloud. But all of these problems will feel a little silly like in 10 years from now. Like in 10 years from now, it will be so patently obvious that how would I not want to store every memory that I've taken with either my phone, my tablet, or my Google Glass, or whatever be the case. Like, it'll just be so obvious. And I think there's still a lot of data left to get up there. Yeah.
Do you think that the big data world is really going to be the world of startups? If you think post-Hadoop and you think of all the infrastructure that's being built and the applications that are coming on top, is it really going to be the entrepreneurs? Is big data going to change so dramatically? And is entrepreneurial journeys going to be created and made more in that stack than maybe in the cloud stack that we spent the first half of the session talking about? We have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience.
Well, I do think there's the post-Hadoop world. I mean, we've come to realize that Hadoop is just a distributed execution engine. It's not an analytics engine. Yeah, and a lot of things still need to happen on top of that. So what I do see happening is that we see many companies, young businesses, building sort of vertical, either platforms, companies like Ecogenomics that do sort of life sciences work as a platform, or whether it's just applications being built. You want to do customer segmentation. This is the app, this is the library you're going to be using. And so there's a lot of, that's moving up in the stack, mainly because you need to solve problems. All this stuff underneath doesn't matter. That's just busy work, where it really is about what do you want to do with the technologies. And I think that's stuff that is being built at this moment. There's a lot of stuff happening there. Also, I think the combination between analytics and all the devices that are being built, whether it's the Internet of Things or Internet of Everything, it doesn't really matter how you want to call it.
The drones.
Well, take, for example, a little thing like Dropcam. Dropcam on a daily basis uploads more video than YouTube. Yeah? And then this is backed up, actually, by a massive computational engine that sits in the cloud to do the detection of the kind of things that they want to detect in the video streams. Whether it is GE instrumenting their gas turbines and have their data flow into the cloud and do analytics on it. Tata Motors instruments their trucks in real time. There are 200,000 trucks. All the data flows into the cloud, real-time analytics on top of it. So the backing of sort of these real-life things, combined with a massive computational engine that sits in the cloud, is something that we see happening a lot right now at this moment.
But trying to drive that forward, where I think it's going to go is, if we've discovered now that because of being able to handle data sets that are disparate, heterogeneous, distributed, the next stage that we're heading towards, which is only very early, is that we're able to do it because these disparate data sets have some small attribute or in common, location, person, time, some sort of way of defining the data set that allows you to match across and then see a pattern, correlations. Right? You'll see a drive towards open data in ways that we could not imagine before, because it becomes like a DNA that starts releasing context between disparate data sets because it's the way, the language, the vocabulary, right? The taxonomy and ontology gets established. You'll see identity not being a human thing anymore, but saying every jet engine will have identity, every medical device will have identity. Certification, when was it last maintained? Who maintained it? How? We will see that grow. So identity, intellectual property, the DNA of description, these things will start driving a whole, and that's like we're on stage 0 of what could be a very exciting time coming up. So I think when cloud meets big data, right, I will remain forever excited.
There's a place for entrepreneur there, right? Because that's where the intelligence is. Because a collection of data or the infrastructure, you could say, well, it's hard to build that as an entrepreneur, but the intelligence is still.
Which is why we're very bullish. I think we can take a couple of questions from the audience, or maybe one. This is the smartest panel. There must be a question. Right there. I think the mic is coming to you.
Thanks. So I didn't hear too many answers on the questions about privacy and the whole AWS topic.
They all agree with each other on this panel.
So you're obviously referring to all the scandals. First of all, first and foremost, Amazon.com and Amazon Web Services are not part of PRISM. It's the first time I was happy not to be on a slide deck. And so I think for us, and so a good person I think to quote here is Nelly Cruz, who's the Vice President of the European Commission. It's a difficult word here. So she made this statement saying that spying is something that is probably the second oldest profession in the world. It will not disappear. It just happened to have gone digital. And so whatever you do, if you have someone that's breaking into your house, you don't need a lawyer, you need a good lock. And so what we try to do in the cloud is to build the absolute best locks for our customers. So that the cloud can be the place where you can store your data securely, but where you also have total control over who exactly has access to your data and not. And I think that encryption will play an increasing role here. I think key management is key. I think there's so much innovation that we need to do around how to manage keys. Because if you look at most of the data breaches, they have nothing to do with brute force decryption. They all have to do with social engineering to get at the keys that there are. And so there's a lot of innovation that we need to do in that particular area. But 3-4 years from now, everybody will be encrypting their data by default. And then there's still a lot of legislation and other things to do with the fact what happens if things do get breached. But I think, first and foremost, we want to be the place where people can securely and privately store their data and have total control over it.
Thank you. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panelists for a great debate.